Okay, thank you, Nicole. So welcome everybody to our line of business reporting and Acumatica session. My name is Phil Marotta. I'm a CPA and I've been doing consulting for 30 some years. I had a lot of experiences with the Microsoft product line and then worked with a few other products, but then jumped over to Acumatica about, I'd say 5 or 6 years ago. I am a CPA and I was a controller for an international organization. So I have a lot of experiences with accounting and using ERP systems, and I kind of focus on manufacturing environments. As you can tell, there's my email. So if you have any questions or whatever, you want to reach out to me directly, more than welcome to respond. Okay. We want to thank our sponsors, and one of our sponsors is Profix. So they're taking information as well from the ERP system, and they're going to help you, with budgeting, planning, and reporting. So definitely check them out as part of our thing, and thank you for sponsoring. Okay, so exactly what is a line of business? So I kind of jumped over and said a line of business refers to the internal corporate business unit, whereas the term industry refers to external. So this is kind of what Wikipedia says. So what you want to do is when you take your organization, you can define what you want to be internally as a line of business. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So if we look at our typical financial analysis, you're going to start with the sales and revenue line. Okay, and that's pretty easy for everyone to understand. Then you have cost of goods sold, which gets you down to a gross margin. Okay, so this is really what I call, raw product cost associated with the gross margin. Then in certain situations, you may have direct expenses, and then you take your gross margin less your direct expense, getting down to an operating margin. And then occasionally you may have indirect expenses, and we're going to define some of these expenses later on. And this just sets the platform, what we're trying to analyze. And then we get down to a net margin. Now notice here, I'm talking everything at margin level because in a line of business, we're going to isolate what business line is going to drive our net margin. So I usually kind of refer to the General Motors approach. Chevy and Pontiac and GM and Cadillac and Oldsmobile were all separate lines of businesses that they were able to attribute directly to the sales and gross margin, and they went down to the net margin level. And at some point in time, some terrible financial person said Oldsmobile was not making enough money at the net margin level, so they knocked the product line out, and we lost our line of business for Oldsmobile. And I kind of like the old Oldsmobile 442s and Cutlass Supreme, so I'm kind of prejudiced towards that. But that's the type of analysis that gets done when you look at a line of business. And what we need to determine is that if you have no revenue, then there's no gross margin. However, you still may have expenses that are directly related to the line of business. So that's why I'm kind of emphasizing here is if we want to manage our line of business below the line or below the gross margin level, is it possible to do it in an organization? And some situations it's very easy to do. In some situations it's not. So we're going to kind of analyze this process. Okay, so what are direct expenses? Well, direct expenses are related directly without any sales, right? So an AP transaction, a GL transaction, could be banking, could be inventory. All those expenses that the system, that the people normally do in their day-to-day business operations, you can atone it directly to a specific line. And certain situations where you get into product development, marketing, or operations. So if you had a trade show that was specifically for one line of business, well, that marketing expense, you can attribute directly to that line. Sometimes travel and allocations, even with salespeople and phone number or phone bills and stuff like that, all that could be specifically tied to your line of business, where if you didn't have that line of business, then obviously that salesperson goes away or something of that nature. Every company will have their own way of analyzing and come up with their own definition of what they can call a direct expense or an indirect expense. But remember, the goal is that if you can attribute it to a line, and you can use Acumatica to handle that. Okay, all expenses are reducing your margin. The question is, what margin is it going to reduce? The gross, the net, or the operating? Okay, so how can you take that business problem and solve it in Acumatica? Well, Acumatica has these different ways of doing it. They have something called a URL instance. So every time you log in, you have a different website. Each website can be a separate line of business. Then you have something called tenants. So when you log in, it says, hey, what is your company name or what is your tenant name? So when some organizations have a drop-down list, and that is your tenant. Then inside your tenant, you get into companies, and each company can be broken down into branches. But also you have the ability of using sub-accounts, or if you want, you can just use standard linking fields like the class ID or the customer class or item class or any other user attribute. So these are your typical options of how you can manage your line of business. Okay, I kind of went through this already with, a company is a logical entity. Companies have to have, all these rules and regulations about, what a company is, what your branch is. And these are important when you're sitting there setting up your accounting system to make sure that it supports what you want to do with your line of business. Note that your branches and companies usually have the independent tax filings and stuff like that. The sub-account is where we're going to focus more of our attention towards, because the sub-account is an independent field that is associated with every transaction. And you have accounts that can get grouped by account class, but your sub-account is your additional reporting information towards that transaction. And there's some limitations of you're only allowed 30 characters. However, you can break it up to multiple segments. And the key to what we're trying to do here is the sub-account, by using them in a correct fashion, you could predefine them at all the different levels inside your system. So you can predefine sub-accounts to a company, a branch, a posting class, a warehouse, an order type, customers, locations, and vendors, and various other fields. So exactly, what is that referring to? Well, if you had multiple warehouses in your organization and you wanted to track a particular sub-account line of business or segment, you can say these two warehouses are for this line, these two warehouses for that line. Every transaction that goes through those warehouses then will get redirected to the proper GL accounts. And that's what sub-accounts will do for us, and that's the power of the predefinitions of sub-accounts. As a side note, you can apply security restriction groups to your sub-account. So you can say only certain users inside the system can do it. Okay, so we go back to our financial analysis. We talked about the gross margin world and operating and net margin. What is the best tool to use? Well, in my recommendations, and it's only one person's opinion, but I just want to let you know, if you want to analyze your business at the gross margin level, then you can do that without any GL structure changes, and you can do that with what I call class reporting, either at the item class or customer class. There's various standard reports out there that allow you to grow gross margin at that level. If you want to go to the next level where we have operating margin, which we remember we're adding direct AP expenses and other transactions, then my recommendation is, hey, let's just do a sub-account. Now, the reason I'm recommending sub-accounts on this situation is because all you're going to do is look at income statement or selective income statement accounts that are going to be directly related to your line of business. And if you want to go to the net margin level, which gets into indirect expenses, which is allocations and sometimes those transactions, you can accomplish that very easily by using sub-accounts. Okay, so high level, if this is your analysis point of view, these are your potential options for it. If you need to go to the next level, which is a net income world or a balance sheet world, then my recommendation is to start looking into using the combination of tenants, companies, and branches. And Acumatica does support the inter-branch module. So if you have multiple branches and you need to have balancing transactions, then you can set up the do to, do froms, and it automatically does those entries for you. And in complicated situations where you're dealing with multi-currencies and languages and stuff like that, sometimes you have to do multiple tenants. And then there's a solution that Acumatica provides to do consolidations where you're taking transactions from one tenant to another to provide you a consolidated financial. So the way I kind of do it on a high level, if you need to do things at a complete net income and balance sheet level, then go look at these routes. If you're trying to do it as a line of business margin analysis, which is what I typically see a lot of organizations need, then you can get away with doing sub-accounts. They both work. If you also can use branches to handle the net margin and operating margin, but I'm just going to show you some simpler tools by using sub-accounts, and I think it'll reduce your data entry as well as your user experiences in entering information. Okay, so we're going to kind of drill down into the product and look at sub-accounts. So remember, it's part of your segmented key world. Typically, we turn on validation. So this is the demo company that comes with Acumatica. They did it by product group and department. So they did 2 segments that we talked about. And the pre-definition of the validation comes into the segmented values. So these are their lines of businesses, or they call product groups, that are associated to segment 1 of the sub-account. Okay, now what we're going to do is look at a few of these transactions that happen in the system that the user does not even have to worry about the sub-account because they happen by default. So at the AP transaction level, if you set up your vendors that are pre-defaulted into certain lines of businesses, the user will not have to make any changes. In the sales order world, it's very powerful if you analyze your order types and you could set up sub-accounts to control where the revenue and costs go by various settings in the order type. And we're going to walk through that example in a few minutes. And then inventory transactions, you can do it on posting settings or reason codes as well. Now, there are other areas where you can default sub-accounts. They're throughout the system. So things like employees, warehouses, locations, they just pop up everywhere. And they just realize if you set up all those sub-accounts to be pre-defaulted, then the user will never have to worry about putting in the correct line of business. Okay, so here's the print screen of the AP transaction. So basically, I entered this bill in, and when you're over here, it pre-defaulted to CON. But if you hit the F3 key, it gives the ability to make a change and do what you need to do. So I wanted to make sure people are aware of when you're in the sub-account world, F3 works very well in those 2 segmented fields. And the advantage here is that when a user's in, they can enter in transactions across multiple lines of businesses without having to worry about coming up to the top here and changing your branch or your company. So that's what the difference significance is users don't have to worry about, hey, I made a mistake and I put the wrong branch or something in. At the sub-account level, you don't have to worry about up there. You just do it at the transaction level. All right, so let's take a quick look at the solution and see how this goes. So let me pop in. All right, so I'm in the Acumatica demo company, and I wanted to just kind of walk through the bills and adjustments, and we'll kind of do a new one. And I'll pull up a vendor, and the one we're going to use is Alpine. And as I tab through and put in some information here, hit the little plus bar, you got your transaction description. And then if you note here on the right, my sub-account is pre-defaulted. So this comes into here. If I hit my F3 key, I can pick and choose whatever product group or whatever segment that I want to manipulate. Where's that set up at? Well, if you look at your vendor, and we'll draw back on the vendor setup, and look at your GL accounts, in here you have your pre-defaulted sub-accounts associated to this vendor. So I'm specifically looking at expenses. Note here, you can have different sub-accounts for cash discounts, accruals, and whatever you need to do. So the sub-account world has lots of ways to do pre-defaults to make the life easier for the data entry person for entering in information. Okay. Get out of here. I do want to show you on a example of a more sophisticated way. So I took the phone bill and did an import of the lines, and I've already released this thing. But I do want to show you here is inside here, you can then take your phone bill and split it up by the various lines of business. And it's very easy to do, just through the normal AP entry. Okay, so the next area I wanted to look at was order types. Most organizations have distribution in their environment. So if you look at the order type, you can say, where do I grab my posting settings from? Very powerful things here. You've got pull the sales account from your item, your warehouse, posting class, customer location, and reason code. So the demo company by default comes with that. But more importantly, at the sub-account level, it's got these three little codes in here that are called III. But if I hit the F3 key, I can say, grab the sub-account from the branch setup or the employee setup or customer location, which is very popular. Because if you sell to like an Ace Hardware and they've got locations across the country, and in each location, you may want to segment out to a different line of business, then by having this code set up as LLL, when you create your customer locations, you put in the correct sub-account, the system will automatically separate your financials that way you want to do it. So I typically recommend doing something along the line of customer locations, or in certain situations, we get into the warehouse world where we say, okay, the Canadian warehouse has a different set of accounting structure than the U.S. warehouse and Mexican warehouse for those companies that ship products across multiple countries. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of the sales sub-account is set up here at this particular order type. And then for the back end, you can see that it's the same scenario. So you do whatever sub-account you want to do. Note here for freight, you can default it as well. In this situation, it doesn't make sense to do it at other levels. So you do it either at the employee location or the order type level. All these defaults are set up around the system, and I just want to make sure you're all aware of, hey, if you can get into the sub-account world and line of business world by using sub-accounts, you can really reduce the data entry for users because you can put the defaults in the proper areas. And the other one I wanted to look at was the posting class for the items. So here's my electronic computer, and note here, I've got options available to me. Where do I pull the sub-account from? The item, the posting class, or the warehouse. So once again, more options. So as part of your initial creation of your company and setting it up, understanding how the power of sub-accounts work with these pre-defaults, with these simple codes, is a very important part of the system. Okay. Got a couple more minutes, so we're going to look at a couple examples of the sales transaction. I already have my preset order in here, so we're at a typical order entry. You note here, these products I entered in, and automatically what happened on the right-hand side is my sub-account is pre-defaulted, okay? So I didn't have to do that. It's automatically being done. So I'm going to just add a new line to here. So I go into here and I'll pick, my A computer again. And as I tab through and enter in, I'm not doing anything different. Whether I import the lines in or use a template, note here on the right-hand side, the sub-account pre-defaulted because this order type says grab the sub-account from the item, and the item for Acer laptop is set up as an ELE as opposed to CON. All right, now, once you get the data in the system, what can we do with that? So what we're going to do is go to the finance world and say, what are we actually working with? So if I look at my account summary, and in here, I have some information associated with the period, but note over here, I can do it by the sub-account. So if you wanted to say to yourself, show me everything that has transactions associated to the ELE sub, once again, I have the filter that does it, and it says these are the only accounts, or these are the only accounts that have transactions associated with that sub-account. So you know what? It's already built into the system, so why don't you take advantage of this feature of leveraging sub-accounts. Another scenario would be is your account details window. Okay, once again, I'm in here. I'm looking at a particular account number, and I can say, show me everything for a particular sub-account, and I got the same example there. If I drill back on the account by sub-account, this shows me for the telephone expense, here's anything associated to ELE. If I filter that out, then I can see all my examples. So the telephone, this is my total expense, and then here's it broken out by the various sub-accounts. So these are standard windows in the system that you can see the information associated by sub-account or line of business. The account details also has a filter on it. So I'm in here, I'm looking at a bunch of transactions, and this shows, you have to put an account in. So this shows me everything here. Yes, you can come into here and do lookups on your quick filters, but if you're using this, you must take advantage of these parameters. So this window is really nice and it has a lot of power to it. But remember, in Acumatica, with the ease of doing things, we can create a simple generic inquiry, and which I'm sure you've attended one of the previous sessions that showed the power of generic inquiries. But we can do the same thing with taking the GL transaction. We've got our post period, right? And we can say, okay, I want to do a quick filter on this by, just show me this. And this is nice and it works, but what's the power of generic inquiries? Well, you can pivot it. So here we go and say, okay, I want to pivot all my accounts on the left, and then on the top, I have all my sub-accounts. So this will show me all my transactions. So, take advantage of the tools available to you and taking care of the line of business. All right. From a reporting perspective, Acumatica comes with some standard reports. So we typically, can look at product profit and loss by product or line of business. And here is what I was referring to is your revenue, your gross margin, or they call it profit. And you get down to operating, whether they're direct. Well, these are direct. And you've got side-by-side reporting. So you can compare how's consumer doing versus electronic versus food. These are all set up by the sub-accounts, not by the branches. And it's a very nice way to analyze your business across what I call side-by-side reporting. Another example is the 12-month rolling one, which I converted the standard one to become a unit set for the sub-account. So here's all these. And the reason is you can click on this bar and click and say, just show me the electronics version or show me the consumer version. So these are all standard things in the system using Acumatica to analyze your line of business by leveraging the sub-account world for your analysis. All right. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get my PowerPoint back up, but we'll give it a try. All right. So basically, I'm showed the power of sub-accounts using analyzing your line of business by using sub-accounts. And if there's any questions, I'm available to answer.
Just popping back on since we have 5 minutes left, and you timed your session perfectly. That's great. it looks like both Tim and Mike said that I think they like the pivot table. I know personally that Phil has helped me out with some line of business reporting challenges since coming on board at DSC. So it's really great to have Phil sort of talk about this topic in a bit more detail and give an educational session for us. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We still got about 4 minutes left. Thanks again, Phil, for doing this. I know you've had a crazy couple of weeks with vacation, selling your house, all that kind of stuff. So thanks.
Crazy things going on. So, I know this sounds like, I just want people to realize it's like, hey, we have a basic topic that acuCONNECT does a really good job at providing a simple solution without making it too complicated. And I think sub-accounts and line of business reporting gets highly neglected over the course of my, the small to mid business say, I can't do it. Oh, it's too hard. It's too difficult. And it's like, no, you can do it. acuCONNECT provides simple tools to do it. And it's the way you got to analyze your businesses.
Mike Notley asked if you would mind showing the P&L statement, the setup of the P&L statement by sub-account.
Oh, sure.
And Tim said, agreed, most people just look at the overall net income. Yeah, and they then want the line of business reporting later on and are trying to figure out how to iron all that stuff out when it's much easier to take care of that initially in the implementation, but such is life.
So when you create a report definition, you have this thing called row sets, column sets, and unit sets. And what we're going to do in the column set, and actually I was potentially going to do this, but I ran out of time. In the column set for side-by-side reporting, you note down here, you have a data source. And in each of the columns, you can control by what your sub-account is for side-by-side reporting. Okay, and that's how this was set up. It was set up side by side by using the sub account. And here you just put in the first 3 characters of each sub, and each column represents that particular sub. So that's how you do the column set situation. Row sets, sometimes you need to do it, sometimes you don't. I don't see it as often, but it does give you the power at your data source level to put a sub account in, but a lot of times you don't need to do that. More critically is the unit set approach, which I did have in my favorite. If you look at the product line unit set, it's the same concept where you have a code, but what's more critical is your source. So in your source, you can control what sub-account is being used. So when we were showing you that graphical view of the financials with the sidebar or the whatever they call that, that's how it's being done, is by creating a unit set, and you say this particular code is set up to this particular data source, and then that's how the Acumatica puts the two sets together.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, it does to me. Hopefully it does to everybody else too.
All right.
Mike said, excellent dialogue. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And Tim, it's nice to see Tim join my session. That's an honor. I've attended his sessions, and he's a genius.
And we had Robbie here too, our new team member. So that's cool. Thanks,
Robbie. Our new team member, Robbie. Thank you.
Yay.
Okay, so these are fun little topics, and I tend to try to take the simple things and the things that get overlooked and emphasize the power of the standard features, and it's just kind of my approach.
Yeah, us on the acuCONNECT board are super grateful for you to take the time to do the session today, amongst all your other things that you've got going on, and do this for us. This was really great. Thank you again, Phil, so much. Thanks, Candace. If anybody has any questions, feel free to either direct message or anything else. And thank you again to everybody for attending this session today.